palace was alive with music that night, golden chandeliers spilling their warm light across polished marble floors, silk gowns sweeping through the air like waves of color, and the scent of roses drifting in from the royal gardens. Yet behind the ornate doors of the queen's private chamber lay a moment far removed from the glitter of celebration. For the queen had just given birth to a daughter whose arrival was met not only with joy, but with subtle, worried glances exchanged. Among the midwives, glances that the king pretended not to see as he smiled stiffly for the courtiers who had gathered to hear the news. And in that quiet between the whispers, it was clear that something about the child was different. Though no one dared say so aloud, not in a time when physical or mental differences were neither understood nor openly discussed. Instead, the matter was spoken of in hushed tones, buried beneath layers of etiquette and duty, and as the weeks passed, the princess grew in beauty and sweetness, her eyes round and curious, her laugh like the soft chiming of bells. Yet within the rigid structure of the royal court, her difference became a silent burden. Not for herself, but for those obsessed with maintaining the image of perfection that monarchy demanded. Until one rainy afternoon, when a dark, lacquered carriage rolled quietly from the palace gates, its curtains drawn tight, carrying the little princess away from the life she was born into, and toward a place that would keep her hidden from the world's gaze. A sprawling institution of cold stone and iron gates, where the air smelled faintly of soap and damp wood, and where the echo of footsteps down long corridors replaced the music of court musicians. Here she lived among other children, some smiling, some silent, all bound together by the fact that society deemed them unfit for the roles their families might have imagined. Yet in this small world she found moments of joy, playing in a sunlit courtyard when the weather allowed, weaving wildflowers into crowns, and listening to the stories told by kindly nurses who, unlike the court, saw no shame in her differences. Far away, her absence was quietly absorbed into the rhythms of royal life, her name gradually omitted from official histories, her portrait never commissioned, until she became a ghost in her own family's story. But hers was not the only tale like this, for across the continent in Denmark, Princess Alexandrine was born with Down syndrome in the early 20th century, and while she too was removed from the public eye, those who knew her remembered her as gentle and full of warmth. Happiest when surrounded by the scent of fresh blooms in the palace gardens, then there was Anne de Gaulle, the beloved daughter of French leader Charles de Gaulle, whose life was short but deeply cherished, for unlike many others, her father never turned away from her, holding her hand in public, smiling in photographs, and treating her as a treasured part of his family until her passing. Yet for every Anne, there were dozens whose names were lost entirely, their photographs destroyed or locked away, their lives confined to rooms that history refused to enter. In those times, a royal child with a visible difference was seen not as a person to be embraced, but as a flaw in the lineage, a potential threat to alliances and public image. And so the simplest choice for rulers was to remove them from view, cloaking their absence in silence even as their siblings grew to wear crowns and lead nations. Imagine the loneliness of watching seasons change through the same narrow window year after year, the smell of autumn leaves carried faintly through, a cracked pane while the sound of distant bells marked festivals you would never attend. Imagine the longing in the eyes of a child watching visitors arrive at the gates, wondering if perhaps her family might be among them, and the quiet acceptance. When they never came, this was not cruelty in the eyes of the heir, it was tragically considered mercy, for society believed such children would suffer more in the public eye than in seclusion. But this belief, wrapped in gilded language, still abandonment. Centuries passed before such stories began to be told, before historians and biographers began to unearth the letters, the receipts for care at distant institutions, the faded photographs of children who looked strikingly like their royal relatives. And with their rediscovery came a reckoning, a recognition that monarchy was not just jewels and power, but also shadows and secrets. Today we view these stories differently, with compassion and outrage intertwined, see the injustice of erasure and the quiet heroism of those who found joy despite it. Imagine the resilience it took to grow flowers in a walled garden, to laugh when laughter was rare, and to love without ever being told you were loved enough. And as we bring their names and faces back into the light, We do more than honor their memory. We challenge the idea that worth is measured by perfection. The truth is that these hidden royals were every bit as much a part of history as their famous siblings. Perhaps more so, for their stories reveal the humanity behind the crown, the vulnerability behind the velvet, and the cost of upholding an image at the expense of love, and in remembering them now. We ensure that no child, royal or otherwise, will ever be so easily erased again, their lives once confined to the margins. Now take their rightful place in the center of the narrative, where they have always belonged, reminding us that the measure of a kingdom is not in its gold, but in its grace. It's not in the perfection it displays, but in the compassion it extends. And that the most noble legacy any ruler can leave is not the grandeur of their palace, but the kindness in their heart.